Hello, everyone. Welcome to Throwback Thursday. I am Yoshi Lan, and today we are going to talk about judgmentality and, to an extent, critical. Criticality? Being critical. Okay, so these two are some of the things that I used to be very strong in. I wasn't super judgmental, but I was hypercritical. And hypercritical is like a heavier version of being critical. It's like in between judgmentality and criticism. Okay. So being hypercritical, not exactly a way, it's not exactly something that benefits you in the long run because, from my personal experience, hypercriticism was the fastest way to ruin anything. And because I have keen senses and attention to detail, I pretty much ruined everything for myself. Okay, so if you have such strict standards and molds for how everything should be, and I'm Scorpio, I'm quadruple Scorpio, so that just tells you how opinionated I used to be before my spiritual work. It took over 12 years to loosen up this really dense, dogmatic type of um, thought process that I had. Okay, so if things weren't the way that I thought they should be, and most of the time I will educate myself to know what it is I'm talking about before I form very strong boundaries. And then once that cookie cutter is made, everything that falls out of it is pretty much not kosher. That's the term that I use. It wasn't kosher. And if it wasn't kosher, it's something that I couldn't enjoy. So one of the things that I used to hate was Japanese crepes because I had already this notion, this crepeness, and that was the French crepe, okay, because crepe is from France. And so when I had a crepe that was a French crepe that was amazing, I thought that was awesome. And all crepes should be just like this. And then I had the Hong Kong crepe, which is kind of like a French crepe but thicker. And I was like, this isn't really a crepe, but it's okay. And then I had a Japanese crepe, and I'm like, what the fuck? I just like, I mean, it tasted good, but I'm just like, what the fuck is this? This is not a crepe. Okay, that's just the reaction I had because crepes are supposed to be fluffy and soft and delicate. Okay, that's what a crepe should be, according to my perception of crepeness, of what it is to be the epitome of a crepe. Anything else that wasn't a French crepe wasn't a crepe. So I really didn't like Japanese crepes, and this pretty much translated in every other aspect of my life. That was just one example. Okay, so if you take like art or you take movies or writing stories, when I watched movies, I would ruin the movie for myself. So a lot of people, what they do is they tend to blame the outside. They're like, oh, I didn't enjoy that movie because that movie sucked, or that actor sucked, or the music sucked, or the writing sucked. You know, something has to suck. It's not the person watching the movie, it's somebody who was part of making this movie. And making a movie is a very arduous process. So just saying, until you're part of the industry and have tried it yourself, you shouldn't really be mocking it anyway. So, how did I transition myself out from this really thick box of judgmentality? It was definitely not easy because Scorpios, we like to be right. Okay, we like to be right all the time. And when someone disagrees with us, we pretty much bury them with a mountain of examples until they see things our way. Okay. or my way. And then if not, then we just agree to disagree. So in order for me to move out of this, I first had to become more open-minded, right? Because if you see things in a particular way, and if you have very strong opinions about something that are, and you're, what's the word for it? You're not able to be persuaded, then you are closed-minded. Okay, that's just the fact of it. And in my quest to become enlightened and superior and open-minded, you have to be open-minded in order to get there. So I started becoming more tolerant. I started listening more to see what the other person is saying and to hear what the person's actually saying. Because if you don't actually listen to what the person's saying and you just have all of these things in your head of what you want to say to rebut the person, you're not learning anything. And so this is also one of the reasons why a lot of stuff kept repeating in my life. And this happens for a lot of people. Okay, it's not just me, it's not just my mom. Pretty much the majority of people go through this process where they get defensive and then they immediately bring down their mental blocks and then all these excuses that they can throw at. And like, no. It's not me. It's this. It's that. It's you. It's all of these things. But in reality, it's all of the above. It's all of the above. But when you look at things from a spiritual perspective, there's really no benefit in anybody when you blame, when you play the victim, when you're judgmental, when you're critical. None of these really has a benefit for anybody. So when I became more spiritual, I took the next step of not just being open-minded, but also being kinder and more compassionate. Because if I'm being harsh on the person, it's because I was treated that way in the past. So it's just a reminder of what people did to me. And it's a reminder that, oh crap, as a child, whenever something happened to my family members, my older brother, sister, my mom or dad, they would dump their shit on me. And they were very critical. And so that's how I started treating other people. That's what I learned. That's the energy that I received. So that's the type of energy dynamic that I assumed was okay. But really, it's actually quite rude. And it doesn't benefit anyone because it's the fastest way to shut somebody down. And sure, there are some people that have the ability to be resilient, and rather than being shut down by such strong, imposing energy, they use it to fuel themselves forward. I was like a mix of both. In some cases, it would fuel me. In other cases, it would crush me. But in general, I hated it. And then when I realized that that's what I was doing to other people, I was like, oh shit. It's also because I do it to myself, because that's what I learned as a kid. So I did it to myself. And my rebuttal for that is, you think I'm being critical? I am even more critical of myself. So if you think this is critical, you should listen or you should hear some of the stuff that I say to myself. You should see the standards that I give for myself. And usually most of the times when people hear it, they shut up because they're like, holy crap. It turned out I was actually being a nice douche rather than just being a douchey douche. But in the end of the day, being a douche is it's incurring heavier karma and complicating things for everyone around us, as well as myself. Okay, rephrasing that. Being a douche at all, being a jerk, is complicating my own karma as well as everyone else's karma that I come into contact with. And if I want to be a sage and be this enlightened model and all this other stuff, then, who does it really benefit? It doesn't benefit anyone. And when you look at things on the spiritual level, everyone has their own boundaries, everyone has their own journey. So if somebody doesn't agree with me, it doesn't matter because that's them and I am me. There's a clear boundary. Does that make sense? If I am offended, or if I am being judgmental or critical of somebody, it's because I am taking it personally, right? There's really no reason for me to be doing that. So what I do now is I say things in a factual way. So you could call it, or you could put it within the realm of a critique or constructive criticism, because that's pretty much what it is. I am explaining something, but usually in a neutral or more positive way. So I'll start with something positive, like, oh, that was great. You did a really good job. This is really awesome. I love spiritual stuff. And then I'll start talking about my experience and how I see things. So I'll say things like, from my experience, this is what happens. Like, what do you think about that? So it's not imposing. Does that make sense? I make it more engaging. I talk about my experience. This is how I see things. Do you see it similarly, or why do you see things this way? So it's more of an engaging conversation rather than, no, you're wrong, this is right. You don't learn anything that way. And if you are speaking in a way that you think you know everything, you're also shutting out your own enlightenment. So this is one of the reasons why I have changed also my way of speaking. It's not because the way I'm speaking is not right, if that makes sense. It's beneficial to speak in a way that is just more open, because everything trickles down. So if you speak with a very open type of language, a very compassionate and supportive type of language, everything trickles down. It trickles down to yourself, your subconscious, and you start to see things more openly. It's easier to hear the other person also when you have just this default mode of being open. Okay. It was very difficult. It was very difficult. I would get very defensive, I would get very critical, and it's just this one convoluted ball. And if things didn't, go well, it would quickly escalate into a trigger fest. And trigger fest is just when people are just throwing emotional baggage at each other, and that causes even more karma. So if you find yourself triggered, just remember that you are taking it personally. Your sense of boundaries isn't clear, and it is treading upon something that reminds you of what's happened in the past, and they're not related. What's happening now is completely unrelated to what's happening in the past. It just has a similar energy and similar vibe. And so that's why these emotions come up, and that's why certain people get defensive. That's why you may get defensive, or the other person gets defensive. It's easier to reduce the tension when you start taking a very soft approach. So I like to preach about the yin and the yang. Yang is a very direct approach, very firm. Yin is a very soft approach, very round. You can consider it passive or indirect also. Yang is very direct and straightforward. And if you are just direct all the time, like when you give feedback, some people, their egos get hurt. Some people get defensive because of that. So another way of doing it is the yin way. And that's what I was saying earlier, making it about myself. So this is how I see things. That's yin, because I'm focusing it on myself. And then I engage the person. So it's an indirect way to engage someone, versus I don't think this is correct. So that's more yang, because I'm just directly attacking the other person's thing. So a yin way a softer yang way of doing it would be, this is my experience. I think it's this way. Okay. Or for my experience, it's been this way. So I am curious how you came to this conclusion or why you see things this way. Okay, does that make sense? You see how it's still yang, it's direct, but it's softer. It's not like I am right, this is my experience, which makes my experience right. Okay. A lot of people have this sort of like bombast when it comes to that. Just because they've experienced it, it automatically makes it correct. But everybody's experience is true for themselves. So does it really make sense to argue? Right? All right. So let's see. What other things can I say about criticism? Criticism and judgmentality. Let's see. I think I've covered the major components of it. It's a very heavy type of energy. And when you're being judgmental, it's also an indicator of either triggers or taking things personally. And I would encourage the person, if you know somebody or if you find yourself being judgmental, it's because you are taking something personally, or because you are closed-minded, or because the other person is triggered, or because the other person's closed-minded. One of those things, or taking it personally. Okay, there's at least 3 different ways that this type of reaction will come around. So rather than engaging and making things heavier, take a step back and go, I wonder why this bothers me. Because that's the root cause of it. Okay, people are judgmental because it bothers them. What is the what is the one thing everybody says when they're being judgmental? Oh, it just bothers me. Wow, that's interesting, right? Why does it bother you? A lot of people just be defensive. It just bothers me, okay? That is spiritual bypassing. Okay, that's just ignoring a trigger and an opportunity for soul healing. So I would encourage you and people that you know who are often judgmental or find themselves in a place of being judgmental or critical to take a step back and see why it bothers you or why that person is bothered, and just simply asking are you okay? Does this bother you? That's soft enough to not be imposing, and usually the person will calm down. I mean, they might escalate if it's a really big trigger. I call those landmines. If it's a landmine, it will escalate, but at least it's more like a venting rather than being directed at you. It's just a volcano exploding, and you just happen to be by the volcano. Okay, it's not like a volcano is exploding and it explodes asymmetrically and you're at the front of the explosion. Okay, that's completely different. That means you triggered the landmine. But if the landmine is just triggered because you're using a soft approach, it's much safer, and the person can calm down much quicker that way because they let it out. Like, yeah, I'm bothered by it. Or, yeah, this really pisses me off because XYZ. So that's one way of doing it. And then also, if it's yourself, then you have an opportunity for soul healing because there's something there that happened in the past that hasn't been resolved, and that's why it still bothers you today. So whenever something bothers me, that's an opportunity for me to do soul healing. Like, for example, one of the things that has bothered me recently was when somebody was they were imposing their energy by insisting that I was bothered by something when I wasn't. So just because they kept saying, you're bothered by it, you were bothered by it, I'm like, no, I'm not bothered by it, but I am bothered now. So it's funny. It's like some people don't realize that what bothers them is actually interaction rather than the content of the interaction, the content that the interaction is based on. It's very interesting how that works. And yeah, so rather than becoming defensive and getting into an argument with that person, I'm just like, okay, so this is like what's happening. First of all, I start off with, that sounds like an assumption. Okay, because they're imposing their energy onto me. They're saying that I am this and I am not, and I know I'm not. So rather than hitting hard with a yang response, I soften it with, that sounds like an assumption. Okay, rather than saying that was an assumption and I don't like that, I said that sounds like an assumption. And then I went on to what I was talking about, and then I clarified with, but what does bother me is you telling me that I am bothered by something. Because who are you to tell me what I'm bothered by? I'm the one that has studied this, and not only that, that person knows that I went through a program that looks at people's energy and finds out if they're triggered. So I'm just like, okay, first of all, I would know if I'm triggered because that is the program I went through. And I am being bothered because I'm being imposed upon. That is what it reminded me of. And I was like, wow, that's very interesting. Throughout my entire course, I realized that I didn't actually process that before. And that happened a lot of times. So using that opportunity to look back inward to myself rather than getting into this antagonistic and hostile exchange with that person, I took a step back and did retrospect, because retrospect is 2020, as they say. And I found that my mentor, that people around me, my parents, they would insist things. They would insist I do things. They would insist that I be things. And it's just a lot of impositions. And I'm just like, oh my God, how did I not see that? It's been over, 2 years now since I started my spiritual journey, and I had not processed that, and it was still happening. And that was one of the things that I really hated, actually. And as that energy built up, because I wasn't processing it, the energy would build up, and then me and my mom would get into big fights because she has her own triggers, and then part of her trigger is to impose her energy onto someone else, which I didn't like. So the more she did that, and then I mirrored it, it was just like boom, sorry. That was really loud, but that's just that's just to demonstrate like how big it was. Like, I don't yell very often, and that's like, if I do yell, it's because I'm practicing voice acting or doing some sort of vocal training. It's not because I'm yelling at a person or somebody is far away and so I raise my voice. Those are the only reasons that I yell now. I've stepped away from aggression because I know now from a holistic spiritual perspective that if you're doing anything aggressive, you're convoluting your own karma. And I do not like to convolute my karma. Like, actually, my karma is already quite convoluted and heavy after all of the many lifetimes I've lived. So it is time to start becoming more aligned with the holistic spiritual practice, and to start unwinding all of this convoluted karma. So part of that process is called karmic resolution, and that is having a different response to all of the stuff that happens in this type of context. So just because you learn your lesson, it's still going to happen to you, because you still have to show the universe, including yourself, that you have learned your lesson and you can now act differently. You're not taking it personally anymore. You're now in alignment. You have clarity. You are a guru in this situation. So rather than getting triggered, you would go, okay, this is what it is, and that's that. That's it. That's all there is to it. There's no excess energy, there's no heaviness, no convolution. It's just very clean. Keep things simple and clean. All right. Hopefully this was not too roundabout. It seemed like I repeated a lot of things, but maybe that's beneficial to the people who find this video. All right. I'll be making more Throwback Thursdays. The next one I would like to make on grudges, because as a Scorpio, I held many grudges. And there was a point where I just wanted to be so constipated on the soul level that I actually said, like, I will not forgive them. I'm so pissed that I will hold on to this grudge for at least 3 lifetimes. And now that I understand things on a spiritual level, I'm like, oh damn, that's really intense. 3 lifetimes. That's dying, being born, dying, being born, dying, being born, and then dying again before I let go. That is a really long time. That is hundreds of years right there. That is hundreds of linear human years. Oh, man. I said some really interesting things back in the day. Of course, now I can laugh about it, but back in the day, I would have killed somebody if they made fun, if they made fun of me after I said something like that. So, yeah. Interesting how times have changed. It's a matter of perspective, as they say. All right. Thank you for watching. Namaskara. See you guys around. And also, my Patreon page is up. It is patreon.com/YoshiTheSage, YoshiThesage. All right. See you guys around.